Hey everyone, and welcome to The Rational Republican, a podcast where we look at complex issues facing us here in Oregon and around the nation. We'll try to address issues from a nonpartisan perspective and view our disagreements through a lens of respect rather than tribalism or divisiveness. I'm James Ball. This is Nick Perlasky.
Hey listeners, how we doing?
Today's podcast is brought to you by ProLift Garage Doors. ProLift is your one-stop shop for residential and small commercial garage doors, from openers, springs, and rollers to full reinstalls. They offer same-day service on all garage door repairs with no extra charge for evenings or weekends. Serving the greater Portland metro area, call today and set up your free estimate at 503-558-6349 or at proliftdoors.com/Portland. Again, that's 503-558-6349 or proliftdoors.com/Portland.
All right, so we're recording on video, and I'm going to start the audio part. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Rational Republican. This is your host, Nick Perlasky, along with James Ball. I'm doing the introduction today because we've got one of my very dear friends, Deanna Rusch, has come on the podcast, and we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about Oregon and Washington and local government and all kinds of good stuff. So Deanna, first off, thank you very much for your time. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you guys for having me. Happy Friday, everyone.
Hey, cheers.
Cheers. I'm drinking a CBD infused beverage, which is my favorite things right now. So it's delicious. So
I'm drinking tequila. So
yeah, okay. Well, you got me beat, but I'll be more relaxed probably than
I didn't do this intentionally, but I'm having a nice IPA in our Shelly Bossart Davis glass from when we recorded an episode with her. So Shelly, if you're listening, we still appreciate that.
Nice. So okay. So yeah, my name's Deanna Rusch. I live actually in Camas, Washington, which for those of you in Portland, it's right across the river and about 5 or 10 minutes east of 205. Yeah, it's right on the Columbia River. It's called, Camas, Washougal is called the Gateway to the Gorge. So that's what it's called. So I live in Camas. I actually work in downtown Vancouver, Washington on the new waterfront. I don't know if anybody's seen that yet, but they're redeveloping the whole waterfront. Yeah, so we occupy one of the first office building down there, and that's where I work as a lawyer. So I practice family law in Vancouver, Southwest Washington, really, and have been doing that for about 15 years. So that's who I am. I've done some local politics. I currently am an elected Clark County Charter Review Commission member, which is a 15-member board that's reviewing our county charter. And then I do a lot of other things too. I don't know. It's exhausting to talk about on a Friday. I'm like, that's everything I did this week. So,
well, a shameless plug. I know one of the things was in the pandemic, I would host online bar trivia, and you and your team were just absolute studs at it. They would sweep every question every week, and it was grossly unfair to the other participants, but a number of charitable donations were made in y'all's name. So that's at least one of the main important things.
And it was a lot of fun too. So.
Heck yes. All right. But you mentioned something in there that I definitely do want to talk about, and kind of starting on the local politics level. Yeah. What got you interested, first off in the law, and second off in the office that you currently hold?
Sure. So first with law, it's a funny story. I was actually pre-med in undergrad. I was at UW. So I was a biochem major. I think I would tell people starting at like the age of 5 that I was going to be a heart surgeon. And there's actually there's pictures of me wearing like sweatshirts when I'm a kid from like Yale Medical School and all this stuff. And so I set my expectations for myself very high. So I went to UW, was biochem major. And then actually one summer I needed like humanities credits because I had all the science and math. So I took this like law for undergrads, or I call it law for dummies. That sounds horrible. But basically like you had lawyers from the community who came in and taught a class to undergrads that was just like a survey of legal principles. That was a real, cursory review. And I did really well and really enjoyed the class. And one of the professors, who was a local attorney, actually came up to me and she was like, "What are you doing sitting in a lab all day?" And I kind of thought, I did some thinking. I remember I was living in a frat that summer, which is what you did in the Greek system. Like, so they let girls move into the fraternities. Yeah. So we had girls around to hang out with like the rushies who came to rush the parties.
So that's why they asked Deanna Rusch.
Well, exactly. Yes, exactly. Pun intended. My mom still regrets that summer because she walked into the frat and saw where we were living and like promptly turned right around. But I was living at Tau Kappa Epsilon Teaks at UW, and I actually remember Or were you a Teak?
Yes, at University of Texas. Yeah, absolutely. I'll have to go up and see your old stomping grounds.
Yep, I lived at
doing
Teak.
bar trivia for a year, and you didn't know that you were in the same fraternity?
We were in the same one, but I lived at his one. I was a Pi Phi.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think we've talked about Greek system on trivia, but anyway, I called my mom that summer, and I literally called her, and I think I was crying, and I said, would you guys be mad if I switched from pre-med to pre-law? And she's like, what? So I did. Finished a pre-law degree in like a year and a half, graduated early actually, and then went to law school. So that was the law part of it.
Okay.
Cool.
What was the other part of the question?
Now, the office that you're an elected official. This is James and I preached a day and night on this podcast about how important it is to be involved in local government, and you're living it.
Yeah. So this is the Charter Review Commission is probably about the most kind of procedural, technical, like local government position. It's probably the most technical that I've been in, because literally all we're tasked with doing is 6 years ago, I believe, Clark County passed the new home rule charter. And so they moved into being a home rule county. And so they went from 3 commissioners who basically ran the county to a 5-member council, including a chair, and then they hire a professional county manager. And so they went to a different form of government. And in that charter that was adopted by the voters, like I said, I think it was 6 years ago, it mandated that there had to be a review of the charter within 10 years by a 15-person commission. And so last November, people ran for that commission. And of our 4 districts in Clark County, so there's 4 geographic districts, people elected 3 from each of the 4 and then 3 at large. So, which resulted in the 15. And we've been meeting weekly, every Wednesday, weekly, pretty much since about the end of June, to discuss how the charter is working for the county, how it's not working, and to come up with proposed amendments to put on the ballot. We have a chance to put on the ballot this fall and next fall.
Wow. Okay.
About changes to the county charter. So that's what we're working on right now.
Interesting. So, I'll say that sounds awful.
That's a common response that I get.
I've had to deal with my share of bylaws and charters and all sorts of stuff with HOAs and with party politics. And wow, I mean, bless you for taking that on.
It's been an interesting, I've never served on a body this large, so that's interesting. And then it's just got a really interesting demographic on the commission. I mean, people from all different backgrounds, all different jobs and just histories. And so it's been really neat collaborating with people that I didn't know. I knew a lot of the people, but there are some I had never met, never heard of, and have completely probably different ideologies than I do. But we've collaborated really well, and we've been able to arrive at some non-political issues that everyone seems to agree upon. You know what I mean? So that really is why I get into local politics, period, which is we have so much that tears us apart. Let's instead focus on what we can, I mean, even if it's one thing out of 100, that's better than saying, okay, we disagreed about 99 things. I'd rather talk about what we can agree on. So it's been cool so far. So
that's great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, so can I ask, what are some of the changes that you've seen in Clark County since you've switched forms of government? It seems like one of those things where it's like on paper, it's like, okay, whatever, we're going from column A to column B. But I would have to imagine in real life and the effects of a number of the citizens, a number of the businesses, bars, restaurants, everything, like there have been market changes because of the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah. So the original freeholders who wrote the original charter that passed, like I said, 6 years ago, they wrote the charter to basically, I mean, I think the goal, and I'm just paraphrasing, was to increase and broaden representation and make it so that, Clark County is not as small as it was 50, 60 years ago when the Board of Commissioners was enacted, or could even be 100 years ago. I mean, it's grown by leaps and bounds. Mm-hmm. And so, the movement, I think, in cities and counties is to move towards more of like the weak council, or you know what I mean, where you have more of a professional city or county manager, and then you have the council or the commission that's more of the legislative body, but there's a clear differentiation between the executive and the legislative. Okay. Versus in a non-home rule county, the council kind of does both. And so when the freeholders wrote this charter, they were really interested in separating those powers like we do federally, so that there's checks and balances, of course. And so the other interesting thing that it did was, some cities and counties elect their city or county manager. So you think about that, and you think about, for Clark County, for example, so I don't even know what the budget for the county is, but you figure if you had a non-elected, which is something that's been discussed an elected, so the citizens get a vote on a county manager, anyone in the world could literally pay their fee and become a candidate for that race. And then if they won, they'd be in charge of, running, I think we've got over 1,000 employees in the county. So you're running, 1,000 person business. And the fear is the fear was, what if it's a popularity contest and you have someone just not qualified? And so the current charter, the council appoints the county manager. And so that makes it an appointment versus an elected decision.
I gotta say, I feel like I like that decision. I can't remember where, but there was some election in 2016 where a grossly unqualified person won high office and was just in charge of absolutely everything. And I can't.
Was it Pierce County?
You can't place it.
It was somewhere on the east. No, it was a guy from New York. He was a businessman or something like that. Won something. It was.
Okay. Now I'm catching your shot. Yeah, cut out the last 30 seconds where I was being so dense about your joke. I'm all like, who, Nick? Who is it? Come on. That's funny.
No, I honestly just hear you talk about that. This is the extent of my local government experience. I kept thinking of Rob Lowe as Chris Traeger in Parks and Recreation, and the Amy Poehler character who gets elected to city councilor, but he as an unelected official is kind of beholden to nobody, and he's able to effectively manage the city, whereas Leslie Knope gets very heavily involved with the politics and often to hilarious ends.
Yep.
I think that's an interesting case. I mean, the more I pay attention to local politics, especially like lower than the state level, just how many different ways you can organize things. You just kind of, I don't know, naively, I guess, before I started getting involved in paying attention, assume like there's a mayor and, there's the mayor runs the show.
Mm-hmm.
But, Oregon or Portland in particular gets a lot of, I don't want to say flack, but a lot of attention, at least within the circles that I run, for being the councilor weak mayor type of system.
Mm-hmm.
The only large city in America that has this. And a lot of the problems that we run into here in Portland is because we don't have a strong mayor. We have these 5, city councilors who have their own little fiefdoms of bureaus that they're in charge of. And the mayor is not really any more powerful than any of the other councilors, not by a lot anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys just changed one from one to another. I know there's, I think there's one city, either Beaverton or Hillsborough, where the elected mayor is also the city manager. And so it's a paid position, but you're elected and you have both hats. But yeah, then there's the appointed city manager, which is I think kind of similar to how school boards are run here in Oregon, where you have a volunteer school board, but then there's the superintendent who is paid and a professional and not elected, but hired essentially.
Haley Lowry, PPS school board chair, friend of the podcast. We'll have her back.
Right, exactly, and a volunteer. Just I don't know, just
it was interesting. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because the city that I live in, so Camas, I was on city council for a couple of years, and Camas is still actually a strong mayor form of government. So the city of Camas, we actually looked at it when I was on council. We had a committee that did a study on what the pros and cons would be of moving from a strong mayor to a weak mayor, because Camas is one of the only, I don't want to say only, but it's a rarity in Washington to have a city of over 25,000 that still operates with a strong mayor form of government. And the reason, and so some of the issues that came up when we looked at it was, so in Camas, we were lucky we had a mayor. So our mayor gets paid for barely nothing, but it could be a full-time job. So I think they make 30, 40,000 a year is what they're paid. We were lucky though. We had a mayor for like 11 years, 2 mayors ago, who had the ability to basically serve as a full-time mayor and was not worried about making a living because he had a spouse that was able to help with that. And so for a long time, we had a very productive, strong mayor in office because he was able to devote time to it like a full-time job. Mm-hmm. The next mayor that we had well, she had a full-time job in Vancouver and so did the best she could. But the issue that comes up with the strong mayor form is, how are we going to get somebody in there who can do a strong mayor job when you're paying them 30 or 40,000 a year? And so that's been the issue here. And we actually had an election in 2019 when I lost my city council seat, which that's a whole nother thing, which you can ask me about. Actually, it's great political fodder. But we in 2019 saw a write-in candidate for mayor actually beat the incumbent mayor, and the write-in candidate who is now he won, and he's now the strong mayor of the city of Camas. And the guy hadn't had no political experience, had never been on a board, a commission, or anything. And I know the gentleman; he lives around the corner from me, very nice family, no experience. I think he works in loss prevention at a store at the mall, maybe is what I believe. He had great intentions. He was super passionate about it. But because it's an elected strong mayor position, somebody without any experience was plopped in there as mayor and has now been in there for a year and a half. And I've always felt kind of bad for the guy because I know what's involved in that position. And I think he got into it and thought, it's great to have passions and hopes and ideas, but this is how government works. And I'm actually in charge and gonna make decisions for big projects and whatnot. So that's a thing that happens with a strong mayor form of government is the person that gets elected is in charge. And the only way to change that is through a recall, which is obviously, an arduous process. And so it's interesting. I'm still not sold on whether I prefer one or the other. I think there's pros and cons to both forms of government. The weak mayor, strong mayor form, or strong council, weak council, however you want to say it.
Right.
I'm not sold one way or the other because I think there's goods and bads about both. So
I'd be curious for your thoughts on that, actually, because this has come up a couple of times on our podcast. Is Oregon state legislators make like 35 or 40K a year? It's not a free job, but it's very much not a living wage, especially in somewhere like Salem, or a lot of parts of the state. And I've always kind of been of the opinion that you get what you pay for. And if you were to raise those salaries, you would have a lot more qualified candidates with a lot more diverse backgrounds who were able to run. But obviously then the downside is we try to maintain the idea of like a citizen legislator and somebody who's running because they believe it's in the public good, not because they're trying to get rich or they can't get a job somewhere else or something like that. Yeah. Do you kind of have a thought of like, should we raise the pay of the mayor and maybe not, maybe at least have more candidates who file to run for the office?
Yeah, I think you touched on a good point. I think that a lot of people who probably have great ideas and great qualities to bring to local government are dissuaded by running because it's a huge time commitment. And then on top of, a living wage job and a family, that's impossible to do. And so I do think there needs to be something done. I don't know if necessarily raising the pay is the right answer, but I also just think this is just another kind of access issue, which is too, I think that, I'm a I want to see as diverse of people in government as our population. That is ideal, right? Because that would be a fair and accurate representation of the citizens. Yeah. And I do know that the inability to run because of financial requirements, family requirements, I think it disproportionately affects people from diverse or minority backgrounds. I think that's a fact. And, I don't have a citation for that, but I think that it does. So
yeah, 100%.
So I'll provide a counterpoint to that. So back a couple years ago when Lori DeReamer was, former mayor of Happy Valley, she was running for state representative, and I was knocking doors for her and ended up having a conversation with her and had brought up the conversation of pay, of how this, how she was able to be mayor of a, medium-sized town in Oregon and not get paid for it. So that's a volunteer position. In fact, there's only 2 mayors in the state of Oregon that are paid. One is Portland, and I think the other one is, I think it's Beaverton, the one where you're also the city manager. But anyway, talking with Lori, and she was saying she actually preferred not getting paid. Now, she had a business and she's got a husband who had money, so she didn't really need the salary. But she said it made things a lot simpler because she could work 15 to 20 hours a week as the mayor. And she didn't have people coming up to her saying, I pay your salary. What are you doing not working today? Whereas if she was paid, she'd basically, she wouldn't get paid a lot. It would be $25,000 a year probably. But they would expect her to be in the office 40 hours a week. And she's like, I would rather just not get paid. I get the flexibility. I can work as much as needs to be done without people coming after me and trying to throw rocks. So anyway, the counterpoint to that.
I get that point of it. And actually, I'm a Happy Valley native. And so Lori was my mayor for a number of years before I moved. Lori and I are Facebook friends. I think the last time I don't think I've talked with her since the last election. But yeah, no, Lori's great. I appreciate that point, because I think that there are people who probably feel that way. I think that I would probably feel that way if I was in a paid, semi-paid office again, because that's kind of how I would operate too. But I think, again, I have probably the privilege to operate that way. And so, but I think I think there's good points on both. I mean, it's funny because some people ask me, do you ever want to run for higher office someday? And usually my answer to that is, you can't pay me enough. And so, I mean, that, that's a whole nother thing. But, people look at what, like, for example, our Congresswoman, Jamie Herrera Butler, if you look at her benefits package, in writing, I mean, that's a sweet deal, right? I mean, you get your budget for 2 offices, you make X number of dollars for, your benefits, and you got the healthcare and all that. Not even enough. Not even. And, I like my work where I kind of control what I make. So the more I work, the more money I make. And I feel like that's kind of what it all breaks down to, right? The harder you work, the more money you get paid. So
I think you make a good point with the privilege thing. I mean, someone like you or Lori has the privilege of being able to work a 15 to 20 hour a week job unpaid.
Yep.
Whereas most people don't. And to Nick's point, so I'm generally on the side of pay people more, pay people what they're worth. But I just kind of wanted to throw that in there for discussion's sake.
Just to throw a wrench in the gears.
No, and I appreciate, and I will say one thing, and I think that your point is why I'm a firm believer that the people that have the ability and the time to give back need to be the ones who do that. And so, I'm the one in my friends group that's always trying to fire up other people to, like, run for office or volunteer for this, because my friends do have time. They don't enjoy it as much as I do, maybe, but I mean, they have the time and the ability to do that. So people like Lori, I always appreciated when she was mayor, and then when she ran for, the various offices, and I was always a supporter of her. And I hope she runs for something again, because I just think that she's relatable. She's real. She's got a great background. And she, I think that it would be really interesting to get someone from, like, the new Happy Valley and, like, I say she's been there forever, but the expanded Happy Valley down in Salem, because it's been interesting, that district, since they redrew the lines in the last couple of elections and stuff. It's been really interesting getting the people that have gotten elected, because I didn't ever feel, when I lived in that district, politics aside, I didn't feel that certain representatives really represented that district. So they might have been voted in from that district, but they didn't have, like, long-term ties to that area, or they were from, Southeast Portland versus Happy Valley or Clackamas. I think the current representative lives in Happy Valley, I think so, but I don't know. I didn't know her when she got elected. I don't know how long she's lived there, so I'm not familiar with her.
I think she only lived there for a year before. I think she was one of the what is it? Engage or promote or whatever Oregon, the female one that the Democrats run. That she was one of those. She was. Yeah, so she was picked to run for that seat.
My invite to that program must have gotten lost in the mail.
Yeah,
I can't believe they didn't call you. Yeah,
but we can probably, would be the third podcast in a row where we're talking about gerrymandering. But I think that's why. I mean, you look at the map of Happy Valley, and that's what it is. It's Happy Valley, which is a mostly conservative, or at least 55-45 Republican leaning. But then the district just comes up and takes a little chunk of East Portland, which is heavily Democrat, and it's just enough to push it over the line, and Democrats win it.
Yep. So, and I experienced that. So 2008, I knocked doors with Linda Flores. And then it must have been 2010. That was Patrick Sheehan's first race. And so I walked with him and stuff, and he won, obviously. And then when he lost the re-election, it was because I firmly believe it was because they redistricted.
They drew him out. Yeah.
And it's funny because when Patrick ran the first time, so my parents used to live out in Estacada on a big 5-acre property with a huge house. And so they threw a big fundraiser for him when his first election. That was lovely. They like redistricted and they totally pushed that. So all of rural Oregon City and Estacada, I think, was put into Bill Kennemer's district. And so when Patrick's reelection cycle came up, my stepdad was like, wait, what? And so it totally removed that whole rural component that was a big backstop of I know Patrick's campaign. He did a lot out in Estacada and out there because there were big supporters out there. But yeah, when it completely removed that and it became, Happy Valley and then a lot more of Portland, it was just,
Shamia Fagan.
But don't even, cut this out, but don't even get me started. Yeah.
I'm curious.
There are good Democrats, and we've had a number of Democrats that we like on this podcast. Shamia Fagan isn't one of them.
Have you had her on?
No. She would not come on with us. But we've knocked her before. Like, God bless you, do what you do. But I don't think she's good at what she does.
It's been interesting because now that since I've been living in Washington, I always worked up here, so I was always familiar with politics up here. Now that I've been living up here, I go back and forth about which state I think is more of a mess. They both have, you know what I mean? They both have their people, they both have their crazies, they both have their, issues. And
so I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's actually one of the like real serious arcs I'd love to learn a little bit more about is I'm an outsider. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh. I lived in Texas for 10 years. I've only been in Oregon since 2015. I'm an outsider, and I arrive at this place that I love, Portland, and we do all the hiking in the gorge and the restaurants and everything. And it seems very strikingly similar to Washington. Like the two states are very similar, and we have the Republicans here just seem to do worse. Republicans in Washington, I think, do poorly, but less poorly than they do here. And I just, from like a 30,000 foot view, I'd love to know what's that like? What's the difference between the two states, and why is it that Republicans up there can do slightly better and can sometimes win statewide office and can maybe kind of make a difference, versus down here we're just seem to be permanently consigned to the minority?
Yeah, having lived in two of the biggest counties in Washington, so Clark County and then Spokane County, which are, I think both are in the top 5 counties in the state, both of which are pretty strong Republican counties. I think the difference is, you don't have that in Oregon. So in Washington, you really have two pretty well-organized counties that do put forward decent candidates. So two long-term congresswomen. So you have Kathy McMorris Rogers out of Spokane, and she's been in there since I was in law school. So she's been in there for at least 15 to 20 years. And then Jamie Herrera Butler out of, Clark County has been in there for, I think, 8 at this point. So you do have, I think, you do have pretty well organized political parties in both counties. Now they might be a little messy, and I don't agree with them, but they have well-funded, organized parties. And so I think what I've seen is, whereas like in Oregon, there's obviously the outlying areas that are very red. I don't think the population density is there. And those people, sometimes those people are not politically motivated. You know what I mean? So I think that would be my opinion. You both states have the Portland or Seattle that really runs the show for the state. And that's going to be the case when those are, the business epicenters of each state. That's just going to be the fact of the matter. But yeah, I think that would be my kind of observation about that. I think at least on a federal level, and then, statewide, I'm trying to think, statewide, I don't know that the makeup in Washington in the state house is much different than in Oregon. I would guess right now they're both Democrat majorities.
Yeah.
And I think, down here in Clark County, like looking at our state reps, for example, across between our state house and state Senate, I'm just trying to think, the majority of them from Clark County are going to have an R next to their name. And that's always the case. And I would guess the same for Spokane again, but then it's the rest of the state. Yeah.
Interesting. I was reading an article a while back that was it was a left-leaning article, as many of them are. And it was talking about how the Oregon legislature is dysfunctional compared to Washington, and how Washington can get stuff done. And, Oregon has to deal with these nasty Republicans. And rereading the article, it kind of boiled down to, it's like, oh, well, you know, in Oregon, we have these walkouts, which shut everything down. And well, it turns out Washington has a 50% quorum. So there's no point in walking out. And the other one, the other thing they mentioned was that the reading the bills aloud. So it's in the Oregon Constitution that you have to read the entire text of the bill aloud before you can vote on it. And Republicans had been using that as a delay tactic so that Democrats couldn't push through their entire agenda. And well, Washington doesn't have that in their Constitution.
You can read by title only. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, they've waived it now, and you can just do it by the title. But I almost wonder if the Republicans in Washington would be a little bit more feisty, a little bit more be able to push back against the liberal agenda if they had some of the tools that that Republicans in Oregon have because of our 66% quorum or the reading bills aloud.
Yeah, interesting.
And I will say Christine Drazen is the House Minority Leader, the leader of the Republicans, and she too is a friend of the podcast. We've had her on, and it has been phenomenal to watch her over the last 2 years. She's taken the reins, and it's definitely that is like, I don't want to say a hit piece or activist journalism, but OPB put that piece out there as like Washington versus Oregon, and here's what Washington looks like, and here's the big bad Oregonians, and all they do is they're the James Balls. They throw wrenches in the gears, like they're not trying to be productive or anything. And I mean, James, you're absolutely right. It's just like, well, no, it's just
the tools are different.
Yeah, the folks in Washington don't have the same capabilities as what they do in Oregon, so you have to lie down a lot more, and there's a lot more Democrat left-leaning bills that get passed when there's Democrat governor, Democrat Senate, Democrat House.
Yeah.
So you guys being right across the river from Portland, and Portland has been dealing with all sorts of nonsense the last 18 months or so between riots and well, a lot of riots. What's it like being a conservative, mostly conservative city, I guess, being this close? I mean, Vancouver, Camas, I don't know if this is offensive or not, but it's almost like a Portland suburb, to the sense that it's just kind of just across the river. I've heard it referred to that way. There are probably Vancouverites who would not appreciate that description. But do you feel the influence of Portland on your community at all? I mean, when the city's burning, does stuff happen up there too? I mean,
yeah, so, Vancouver, so where I work in Vancouver is literally right across the I-5 bridge. And so I'm right smack in downtown Vancouver. And certainly over the last 15 years, I've seen the county change. And, the close proximity to Portland is obviously part of it. I mean, that has to be, because you have people moving up here from Portland. You have people driving to work up here from Portland. As the city has grown, there's just more people in Vancouver. So it's kind of interesting, because although the county as a whole, so like I call Clark County kind of purplish red, if that makes sense. But then Vancouver, the city of Vancouver itself, is very blue. And so that's kind of an interesting dynamic. So then when you have like the state reps and the state senator from Clark County that are, I think would call themselves a Democrat, they're going to be from the city, like that area. So I think Vancouver, I think you see some ripple effects from Portland. Vancouver had a couple of protests. Vancouver has had some demonstrations, at various parks and whatnot. For the nothing on the level that Portland has seen, but definitely there's been a noticeable change. Out where I live in Camas, it's kind of why I live out here. I enjoy the suburbs, and I like to be kind of away from the fray a little bit, and that includes not only Portland but Vancouver. So I wouldn't live in Vancouver. Just because it is a little too urban for me. I also work there, and I don't really like to live where I work, but no, not so out in Camas, not really. We had some local groups organize some protests over the last year. There was a couple that made some local news and stuff, because we had some like Black Lives Matters groups came out, and we had some Blue Lives groups came out, and I think they were well intentioned, but they ended up clashing a couple of times, and it was pretty, people with flags and honking and loud noises. So, I mean, there was a little bit of that, but nothing to the level that Portland's seen. But I think if you were to ask people in Vancouver or Clark County as a whole, are you worried about Portland creep or anything like that? I think people would say, yeah. I mean, if you ask people in Camas, are you worried about Vancouver creep? People in Camas would probably say, yeah. And that's something that's interesting to me, is how do you keep the cities distinct from one another? And when I find out the answer, I'll tell you. So.
Well, and we've got a lot of friends who are, Mayor of Sandy, Stan Pulliam, friend of the pod. He worries about Portland creep. Another friend of ours, a former mayor of Happy Valley, Rob Wheeler, worries about Portland creep. There's, Tigard, Tualatin, Wilsonville. There's all kinds of it's just, it starts to seep down there, and it's just like.
Well, and I want to be clear too, that there's nothing against Portland, and if people and I have nothing against the protests, quite frankly, or freedom of speech. I wouldn't damage property and do some of the things that have happened, but I have had conversations with friends of mine who are involved in protests, and friends of mine who are persons of color. And I've been seeking education on why certain people feel the need to do things to get attention or to make their point. And so even though I wouldn't do it or don't agree with it, I've been just trying to learn why people do things. And so I've been trying to view it as kind of a learning process, because it's not my world. And so, without getting into too much, what happened last year and stuff and all that, because there's so much, opinions about that. I'm going to support anyone who's passionate about anything. I just want people to be respectful in the way that they communicate their message. That's really all I ask for. So
we did a Black Lives Matter episode, which is nice. Perhaps the height of I don't know, irony or hypocriticness or whatever. Two white guys who I was like, let's talk about these Black Lives Matter. But I think we both very much agreed with you. And when I think about all the rioting and all the destruction, everything, when I think about last summer, the one thing that pops in my head was one of the first days of the protests. There was there was a number of folks who got together, and they went across the Burnside Bridge, and they all laid down as if they were bodies, and it created this. Somebody took a picture. It must have been with a drone or something like that, but somebody took a picture from up above, and it was just the most beautiful and the most haunting image that I've literally ever come across. And this, if you are a Black American, this is what your world is like, is bodies after bodies after bodies. And it comes across the news every day. And I'm right there with you in that having an outlet to voice your opinion on how strongly you feel that this is wrong. This is James and Mai's outlet. We're experiencing it right now. And we can talk about all the wrong things that we see, which is we're Republicans, so there's a lot of wrongness going on these days. But it definitely is one of those things where it's like I can't say that I support destruction of property or some of the criminal acts or whatever, but I also I don't support some of the there's been a lot of over policing. There's been a lot of just start out at the very top of your or your response protocols or whatever, and it's just there's so much about this that the actual message gets lost in how the message is being communicated, and it's that's you got to stop focusing on stuff like that.
I thought it was really interesting that you said you're using this as a learning experience, and I think that is something that a lot of Republicans can learn a lesson from. Yeah. I think that there's a lot of the reason we get a lot of flack on the race front is not so much racism as it is just ignorance and not knowing what it's like to be not white. So I think if you look at people and their actions and you assume a positive intent, assume that what they're doing is positive, and then you try to work around of why are they doing this? What is their goal? What are they trying to accomplish, and why? Mm-hmm. And it's very easy to just kind of sit back and say, oh, you're doing this because you want to be destructive and you want to destroy America and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, and I'm sure there are some people like that, but for the most part, it's an education thing. Mm-hmm. We don't really know. You have to think about it. You have to talk to people and you have to listen. And I think that is kind of what I've taken from this whole thing, and what I think more Republicans should do.
You're here.
Yeah, and that's, this kind of the theme of what you just said is kind of why I wouldn't say I've ever left the party or anything like that. I mean, I'm definitely probably less conservative than I was 20 years ago, but I think that's just life experience. And in the field that I'm in, I work with so many different people and families from so many different backgrounds, that my frustration with a lot of the Republican Party over probably the last, I mean, maybe 20 years, but I think in the last like 10 years, more so than anything since, the Tea Party movement, probably, I just have a big problem with the hangups on social policies and domestic issues that to me are so out. I don't even know how to explain it, but the hot topic issues, it's like, that's why there are some of those that I just cannot get on. I cannot agree with, because they are in direct contradiction with people I love and people I support. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to be a huge, huge problem for me. And it's funny because, speaking of our friend who was elected in 2016, just kidding. But I mean, speaking of him, when people would ask me, why didn't you vote? Why didn't you vote for him? Why don't you support him? Because I didn't vote for him either time. And I didn't. So I always will support our president.
That makes three of us.
Yeah. I hate that term. I agree with you. I will support Trump. I'll support Biden. I'll support Kate Brown. I will support our leadership. I may not vote for them, but I will support them and hope for the best. Hope that they are successful. So anyway. Yeah.
And so when I talk to people about that, I indicate like that, and I say, we're all successful if he's successful. But when people were like, well, you don't like him because of this, or you must not like him because of that, and well, Donald Trump just says he says what he means, and he gets it done, and he's not a politician. All those things we heard from people who were fans of his. My biggest problem was how he treated other people, and specifically people from groups that have been traditionally treated like crap. And I'm just saying that. And he laid it on thicker. And to me, that is just, if I meet someone on the street who treats people like that, you will not have a fan in me. And so that was my biggest problem with him. And I think deep down the Republican Party that I knew, which was a Reagan Republican Party that I grew up with my parents being, I think ultimately deep down that party loves people. I think at the bottom of it, I really do. But I think that it's gotten away from that. And I think that it's gotten away from being ultimately about what's going to help the most people and hurt the least amount. And if that's the formula we're using, like you can't go wrong there. If that's the formula you're using for every decision, but no, it's, and I know that in higher politics, there's so many things, pandering to special interests and who's paying for this and that. So I realize there's a lot of that going on. And so, I'm not trying to be Pollyanna to the fact that let's just all be, get along and be nice. But ultimately, when I step back and look at any decision that I'm making from a political position or from an elected position or whatever, that's really what I'm looking at. And I think it surprises people a lot, because I think when people hear, that I used to be fairly conservative and was very involved in the Republican Party, now I consider myself probably a right-leaning independent is probably how I'd call it. Up here, we don't have to declare political parties up here. So that's kind of nice, because I just kind of hang out and see who's the best. So
you're on the right podcast then.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that's been a big, I'm fairly fiscally conservative. And as far as, defense and security goes, I'm pretty, conservative on those as well. It's just become like the social and the domestic issues where I'm like, fix our national debt or make our country safer. Let's not worry about all the rest of this stuff. That's how I've always been, specifically in the last 10 years. So
I was listening recently to the Joe Rogan podcast, who had Dan Crenshaw on, congressman from Texas. And one of the comments he made that I thought was just fantastic was, there are no policy solutions. There are only trade-offs. And if you look at every policy decision as a trade-off, you have to look at who benefits and who is harmed. And you have to decide, is it worth it? And I think some of, to your point, a lot of the things that the Republican Party stands for on the social side, I mean, for instance, being opposed to gay marriage, what's that trade-off? Who is being harmed? A lot of people are being harmed, and who benefits? Nobody. I mean, really, there's no one benefits from gay marriage being illegal, but a lot of people are harmed.
Well, so, and I have a problem also I have a problem with people who legislate from a place of moral or religious stance.
Yes,
And I realized that we're all innately biased because of our life experience. So I realized that plays a part in who you are and the decisions that you make. But when my observation is that people are opining or legislating on an issue because of a deep-seated moral or religious belief, and don't get me wrong, I will respect every moral and religious belief people have, but the problem is that can't translate so drastically into the decisions you're making in office. I mean, you can have those positions, you know, I mean,
it's how you live your personal life versus how you tell other people to live theirs. You know, yeah, I'm evangelical Christian. I mean, there are certain things that I believe in my personal life that I don't expect anyone else to believe. I mean, unless you are of the same, you know, religious persuasion as I am, in which case we can have a different discussion about that. But from a political standpoint, you look at who you're harming and who you're benefiting. And like you said, do the thing that benefits the most people and harms the fewest and is better for the nation, state, whichever, in general. And I don't think you'll very, very often will go wrong.
I'll say in my personal life, one of my beliefs is that this is a great podcast, and I very much don't expect anybody else to believe with me on that. But I will say I've run out of Shelley Bossert Davis IPA, and I think we're just about out of time on our episode here. But we always end our show, Deanna, by asking our guest who their favorite Republican is, and it can be any past, present, future. If you know somebody in the future, Washington State, Oregon, national, but who do you got? Who's your favorite Republican?
Do you want to guess?
I mean, besides us,
Ronald Reagan.
Obvious answer.
It's not Reagan.
Not Reagan. Herrera Butler.
I'm gonna go with Calvin Coolidge.
George Bush.
Oh, there you go.
Senior or junior?
W?
Junior.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Would not have guessed that.
I have been, and it's not necessarily for political reasons, although I didn't mind him as a president, but also didn't agree with every decision. But I've long really I really like the Bush family, and I've done a lot of studies about them just for fun over the years and kind of reading about the family. I think his parents were phenomenal. Number one, I think they were just both outstanding people. His dad was not the best president, but that's a whole nother thing. But I think they were, you know, I just think they're a great family. I love the stuff that him and his wife have done in retirement. I don't know if you saw, he was on the Today Show the other morning and led a naturalization ceremony in the middle of Rockefeller Center Plaza.
Oh, wow.
So I just love the stuff. I think he doesn't take himself too seriously in retirement. I love his friendship with other people that, you know, then he gets a lot of flack about, which I'm like that. And I love people that are willing to not worry about who cares. And like, if you're friends with someone who that's a different whatever than you, I love that about him. And so I think he probably is a pretty cool guy who'd be pretty cool to just sit down and have a chat with.
I will say, James and I, about a year and a half ago, went to a naturalization ceremony. It's probably top 3 most moving experiences of my own life. And I say this as somebody who lived in El Paso, who lived, 4 feet from the border. Yeah. But in terms of George W. Bush specifically, anytime he gets together with Michelle Obama, the two of them just seem positively giddy to spend time. And it's one of those like very conservative, very liberal, very different agendas. Obviously, Barack Obama, he won the presidency by attacking George W. Bush mercilessly, but it's one of those things where it can transcend politics, and you have very different ways, but you're trying to both make the world a better place. And I think that history will look better on George W. Bush than even what people on the left a lot of times do now. Yeah,
no, I think so completely, and I kind of liken it to I'm a divorce attorney, obviously, and so I'm going toe to toe with attorneys all day on cases, but then most of us are friends. And so it's funny because we'll battle it out in court and then we'll go out for happy hour or lunch later. And actually I've had some clients sometimes who are like, wait, are you friends with my spouse's attorney? And I'm like, we're not in cahoots, but I tell people it benefits the practice, it benefits the profession, and it benefits your case if we're getting along and working congenially, because then things are going to go smoother and cost a lot less money. And so I kind of feel the same with politics, whether it's current people or retired people. Current people, the people that work both sides of the aisle, those are the people who get stuff done. So anyway, but yeah,
appreciate it.
Fantastic. That's a wonderful answer. I do believe that's the first time we've gotten George W. Bush as an answer to that question. We've had, I don't know, 30
we
or 40
don't get a lot of
episodes
repeats. We don't get a lot of repeats. It's interesting.
So that's nice. We appreciate the answer, the thoughtful discussion, and the episode as a whole. I think this was a good one. And listeners, we hope you agree. Let us know. But till next time.
Thanks for listening to the Rational Republican podcast. Your hosts are James Ball and Nick Perlosky. The show today is brought to you by ProLift Garage Doors of Portland, serving the greater Portland metro area for all your garage door installation and repair needs. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can email us at james@jamesaball.com or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can find our episodes at jamesaball.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts.